Class 12th, Chapter 13 Biodiversity and Conservation. If an alien from a distant galaxy were to visit our planet Earth, the first thing that would amaze and baffle him would most probably be the enormous diversity of life that he would encounter. Even for humans, the rich variety of living organisms with which they share this planet never ceases to astonish and fascinate us. The common man would find it hard to believe that there are more than 20,000 species of ants, 3 lakhs species of beetles, 28,000 species of fishes, and nearly 20,000 species of orchids. Ecologists and evolutionary biologists have been trying to understand the significance of such diversity by asking important questions like why are there so many species? Did such great diversity exist throughout Earth's history? How did this diversification came about? How and why is this diversity important to the biosphere? Would it function any differently if the diversity was much less? How do humans benefit from the diversity of life? 13.1 Biodiversity. In our biosphere, immense diversity or heterogeneity exists not only at the species level but at all levels of biological organization, ranging from macromolecules within cells to biomes. Biodiversity is the term popularized by the sociobiologist Edward Wilson to describe the combined diversity at all the levels of biological organization. The most important of them are number 1 genetic diversity. A single species might show high diversity at the genetic level over its distributional range. The genetic variation shown by the medicinal plant Rauwolfia vomitoria growing in different Himalayan ranges might be in terms of the potency and concentration of the active chemical reserpine that the plant produces. India has more than 50,000 genetically different strains of rice and 1,000 varieties of mango. Number 2 species diversity. The diversity at the species level, for example, the Western Ghats have a greater amphibian species diversity than the Eastern Ghats. Number 3 ecological diversity. At the ecosystem level, India, for instance, with its deserts, rainforest, mangroves, coral reefs, wetlands, estuaries, and alpine meadows, has a greater ecosystem diversity than a Scandinavian country like Norway. It has taken millions of years of evolution to accumulate this rich diversity in nature, but we could lose all that wealth in less than 2 centuries if the present rates of species losses continue. Biodiversity and its conservation are now vital environmental issues of international concern as more and more people around the world begin to realize the critical importance of biodiversity for our survival and well being on this planet. 13.1.1 How many species are there on Earth and how many in India? Since there are published records of all the species discovered and named, we know how many species in all have been recorded so far, but it is not easy to answer the question of how many species there are on Earth. According to the International Union for Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources, IUCN 2004, the total number of plant and animal species described so far is slightly more than 1.5 million, but we have no clear idea of how many species are yet to be discovered and described. Estimates vary widely and many of them are only educated guesses. For many taxonomic groups, species inventories are more complete in temperate than in tropical countries. Considering that an overwhelmingly large proportion of the species waiting to be discovered are in the tropics, biologists make a statistical comparison of the temperate tropical species richness of an exhaustively studied group of insects and extrapolate this ratio to other groups of animals and plants to come up with a gross estimate of the total number of species on Earth. Some extreme estimates range from 20 to 50 million, but a more conservative and scientifically sound estimate made by Robert May places the global species diversity at about 7 million. Let us look at some interesting aspects about Earth biodiversity based on the currently available species inventories. More than 70% of all the species recorded are animals, while plants including algae, fungi, bryophytes, gymnosperms, and angiosperm comprise no more than 22% of the total. Among animals, insects are the most species rich taxonomic group, making up more than 70% of the total. That means out of every 10 animals on this planet, 7 are insects. Again, how do we explain this enormous diversification of insects? The number of fungi species in the world is more than the combined total of the species of fishes, amphibians, reptiles, and mammals. In figure 13.1, biodiversity is depicted showing species number of major taxa. It should be noticed that these estimates do not give any figures for prokaryotes. Biologists are not sure about how many prokaryotic species there might be. The problem is that conventional taxonomic methods are not suitable for identifying microbial species, and many species are simply not culturable under laboratory conditions. If we accept or molecular criteria for delineating species for this group, then their diversity alone might run into millions. Although India has only 2.4% of the world's land area, its share of the global species diversity is an impressive 8.1%. That is what makes our country one of the 12 megadiversity countries of the world. Nearly 45,000 species of plants and twice as many of animals have been recorded from India. How many living species are actually there waiting to be discovered and named? If we accept May's global estimates, only 22% of the total species have been recorded so far. Applying this proportion to India's diversity figures, we estimate that there are probably more than 1 lakh plant species and more than 3 lakh animal species yet to be discovered and described. Would we ever be able to complete the inventory of the biological wealth of our country? Consider the immense trained manpower, taxonomists, and the time required to complete the job. The situation appears more hopeless when we realize that a large fraction of these species faces the threat of becoming extinct even before we discover them. Nature's biological library is burning even before we catalogued the titles of all the books stocked there. 13.1.2 Patterns of Biodiversity. Number 1. Latitudinal gradients. The diversity of plants and animals is not uniform throughout the world but shows a rather uneven distribution. For many groups of animals or plants, there are interesting patterns in diversity, the most well-known being the latitudinal gradient in diversity. In general, species diversity decreases as we move away from the equator towards the poles. With very few exceptions, tropics latitudinal range of 23.5 degree north to 23.5 degree south harbor more species than temperate or polar areas. Colombia, located near the equator, has nearly 1400 species of birds, while New York at 41 degree north has 105 species and Greenland at 71 degree north only 56 species. India, with much of its land area in the tropical latitudes, has more than 1200 species of birds. A forest in a tropical region like Ecuador has up to 10 times as many species of vascular plants as a forest of equal area in a temperate region like the Midwest of the USA. The largely tropical Amazonian rainforest in South America has the greatest biodiversity on Earth. It is home to more than 40,000 species of plants, 3,000 of fishes, 1,300 of birds, 427 of mammals, 427 of amphibians, 378 of reptiles, and of more than 125,000 invertebrates. Scientists estimate that in these rainforests there might be at least 2 million insect species waiting to be discovered and named. What is so special about tropics that might account for their greater biological diversity? Ecologists and evolutionary biologists have proposed various hypotheses. Some important ones are: number A, speciation is generally a function of time. Unlike temperate regions subjected to frequent glaciations in the past, tropical latitudes have remained relatively undisturbed for millions of years and thus had a long evolutionary time for species diversification. B. Tropical environments, unlike temperate ones, are less seasonal, relatively more constant and predictable. Such constant environments promote niche specialization and lead to a greater species diversity. And last, number C, there is more solar energy available in the tropics, which contribute to higher productivity. This in turn might contribute indirectly to greater diversity. Number 2, species area relationships. During his pioneering and extensive explorations in the wilderness of South American jungles, the great German naturalist and geographer Alexander von Humboldt observed that within a region of species richness increased with increasing explored area, but only up to a limit. In fact, the relation between species richness and area for a wide variety of taxa, that is angiosperm plants, birds, bats, freshwater fishes, turns out to be a rectangular hyperbola, figure 13.2. On a logarithmic scale, the relationship is a straight line described by the equation log S is equal to log C plus Z log A, where S is species richness, A is area, Z is slope of the line, that is the regression coefficient, and C is y-intercept. Ecologists have discovered that the value of Z lies in the range of 0.1 to 0.2 regardless of the taxonomic group or the region, whether it is the plants in Britain, birds in California, or mollusks in New York State. The slopes of the regression line are amazingly similar. But if you analyze the species area relationship among very large areas like the entire continents, you will find that the slope of the line to be much steeper, that is Z values in the range of 0.6 to 1.2. For example, for frugivorous birds, that is fruit eating birds, and mammals in the tropical forest of different continents, the slope is found to be 1.15. What do steeper slopes mean in this context? 13.1.3, the importance of species diversity to the ecosystem. Does the number of species in a community really matter to the functioning of the ecosystem? This is a question for which ecologists have been able to give a definitive answer. For many decades, ecologists believe that communities with more species generally tend to be more stable than those with less species. What exactly is stability for a biological community? A stable community should not show too much variation in productivity from year to year. It must be either resistant or resilient to occasional disturbance, natural or man-made, and it must also be resistant to invasions by alien species. We don't know how these attributes are linked to species richness in a community, but David Tillman's long-term ecosystem experiments using outdoor plots provide some tentative answers. Tillman found that plots with more species showed less year-to-year variation in total biomass. He also showed that in his experiment, increased diversity contributed to higher productivity. Although we may not understand completely how species richness contributes to the well-being of an ecosystem, we know enough to realize that rich biodiversity is not only essential for ecosystem health but imperative for the very survival of the human race on this planet. At a time when we are losing species at an alarming pace, does it really matter to us if a few species become extinct? Would Western Ghats ecosystems be less functional if one of its tree frog species is lost forever? How is our quality of life affected if, say, instead of 20,000 we have only 15,000 species of ants on Earth? There are no direct answers to such naive questions, but we can develop a proper perspective through an analogy, the rivet popper hypothesis, used by Stanford ecologist Paul Ehrlich. In an aeroplane is considered as ecosystem. All parts are joined together using thousands of rivets, and rivets are considered as species. If every passenger traveling in it starts popping a rivet to take home, causing a species to become extinct, it may not affect flight safety, that is proper functioning of the ecosystem initially, but as more and more rivets are removed, the plane becomes dangerously weak over a period of time. Furthermore, which rivet is removed may also be critical. Loss of rivets on the wings, that is key species that drive major ecosystem functions, is obviously a more serious threat to flight safety than loss of a few rivets on the seats or windows inside the plane.